With the rework of this motor, there are some items I wanted to address: the heater core and the heater hoses. This is the original heater core in this 2003 truck. Occasionally I thought there was an odor of coolant, but I never found any coolant around the motor. This heater core made it through 125,000 miles of gold coolant. It had been well flushed, but there's no documentation of how well flushing works with heater cores. Is there residual gel that's left behind that has the potential of interfering with the new cooler? Many have replaced the old cooler just to have issues later on. No matter what, 16 years is a good life for a heater core. The first step is the removal of the heater hoses, and some seem to have issues doing that. When looking at mine, you could see one of the hoses has the heat shrink clamping collar cracked. The hose was hanging on by rubber adhesion. The service manual is straightforward: depress and pull. Enough people have had issues with those simple instructions that companies make tools to help with the removal. A new hose shows it's a simple lock, and the fitting uses O-rings to seal to the tube. You can buy replacement locks and O-rings from Ford, and replacement connectors if you want to convert to bulk hose. Or you could just clamp the bulk hose to the tubes instead. I'm not paying $20 for a tool. With the hoses done, I'm moving on to the heater core itself. The service manual says just lower the glove blocks, but I'll go for the extra room. Somehow, 2002 Excursion noise panels made it into this truck about 6 months into ownership. Next is removing the vacuum control motor, which is simple enough after you deal with the vacuum hoses. And I stuffed high-density yellow foam wherever I could when the Excursion panels went in. The factory-installed white insulation cannot be removed. You should remove the vacuum motor first. I did the electric door motor first. The instructions are to remove the 2 screws, rotate the motor and bracket off the mounts, and then lift off. I'll show you why that method is a pain in the tail. The second screw is in the back. You have to feel for it. There are 2 videos out there showing removing it as the service manual says, one by a Ford technician. I used my borescope to see what I was doing, and it's still a pain in the ass. I've done a lot of pictorials that break protocol. Notice the 3 tabs that hold the motor to the bracket? It's easy to use a screwdriver to lift the motor off the bracket, bypassing those tabs. Just work the perimeter. You have to lift high to disengage the door, and keep in mind it's keyed. With the motor out of the way, it's much easier to get to the back screw. The bracket has to be rotated to disengage from the posts. The bracket also holds the heater core tubes in place. I lost the rotate and remove video segment, but you can see how to move it in the install segment. Next is removing the door, including lifting it off. For me, it was much easier to pull the passenger seat out rather than laying on the door sill with one knee on the step rail. I needed to vacuum the carpet under there anyway. There is some adhesion of the foam. Except the manual forgot a step. You have to lift the door off the corner. With my 4x4, the transfer case shift module is in the way. Remove connectors. Remove the nuts for the bracket. And you have to work the tubes through the insulation pad at the firewall. Here's a good image of the posts that retain the door motor bracket, most likely needed as the bracket stabilizes the core tubes, and showing the pass-through firewall holes with the foam that will catch the tube's ridges. During reinstall, the keyed motor shaft has to engage the door properly, so you'll have to turn it to align it. I changed the angle of the iPhone so you could see the tube pass through. As the manual says, install and reverse. The foam attached to the door was in good shape, so I didn't have to deal with it. I always start with the first screw manually to get a feel for how it threads in. The Milwaukee is set on 1 with a light trigger as to not strip out the plastic housing. You won't have to deal with the yellow wire. That's my modification to get the radio to have speed volume control. Yeah, I still have the stock radio. I had a hard time reinstalling the control module with the bracket on, although that's the way the service manual says to do it. It was easier for me to install the bracket and then slide the module onto the bracket. It may just be me. Continuing on to the blend door bracket, I had to push the tubes forward. When you install the control motor, remember to engage the drive shaft carefully. It should not be forced, but rotated into place. The vacuum motor. The vacuum hoses. I pulled the glove box, so I have more work. Later model trucks should have pass-through holes to access these screws. And it's all ready for the hoses that just push on. So about the 16-year-old heater core. You can see one side of the fins are clear and corrosion on the other side. A pinhole up top, but I can't tell if it corroded from inside or outside. About 10 years ago, I was helping Nylon with his oil cooler fiasco. There are threads on both Powerstroke org and the diesel stop. This was his clogged cooler that I cut up, examined, and posted the image on both forums. With my truck at the time, I did a more extensive flush than normal people do, trying to remove the gel, although I did not use air pressure like we do today. But I used separate hoses so I could directly flush as well as back flush the heater core. And Karl shows the hoses in his excellent article about flushing that is still relevant today. The images from working on my truck are in his instructions. I improved the delta, but not enough. Cutting open my removed oil cooler of 9 years ago, you can see the chemical flush was working, but all that work didn't clear it. But it was better than Karl's. As I stated at the start of the video, no one has documented how well the heater cores are cleaned after chemical flushing. And after working on this motor, I certainly did not want to have a problem in waiting. Since that flushing work, for the last 80,000 miles, the coolant has been Rotella ELC, a coolant that does not gel. From a sectional view, it looks clean. How about splicing down a tube? There is still gel or goop from 10 years ago. This side is where the blade rode. So I would say if you're going to replace a clogged oil cooler, another few dollars for a new heater core may be a heads-up move. Thanks for watching.